Hello everyone. I thought I might quickly summarize a few modeling tools for Maya for beginners, essentially for people who have never looked at Maya and want to just get some of the basic tips on what are the modeling tools that are useful. And I'm going to go and jump straight into it. The first thing you need to know about Maya is that it is project-based, and that means that whenever you want to create anything, you should think about setting up a project folder structure first. That happens here under the File menu. So before I do anything at all, I'm going to go here to Project Window. I am going to go click on a folder where I click on New Project, go to a folder where I might want to save it. I might just put this on my desktop, hit Select. I've got the desktop selected, and then I'm going to give the project a name. I'm going to model a scooter. So this is going to be the project called Scooter, and it'll create all these subfolders. You can see there's scenes, assets, images. You can change these things, but you should just leave it as the default. And when you hit the accept button on your desktop, it'll create a folder called Scooter with all these subfolders. I'm just going to hit the accept button, and then we can open the File Explorer and go to the desktop. Here we go. And if we sort that, there is a folder called Scooter. And if I look in there, there's these subfolders. So on the desktop is a folder called Scooter. And Scenes is where the Maya files will get saved. If you need to take your entire project with you, you take this entire folder, Scooter. So the most important thing at the moment is to know that every single one of these folders is empty. There's one little script here. And when you create images to texture your models with, they go into source images here. And if you ever do renders, the renders will appear in the images folder. And that's pretty much it to start out with. So the next thing I will do in Maya here, I'm just going to save my file. Save scene as. You don't need to save it because there's nothing in there yet. Scooter. And I'm just going to hit save. You will see that it immediately goes into the right place, into my desktop, Scooter scenes. So if I hit save, then if I go into my folder structure and look into the scenes folder here, you can see there's my empty Maya file. There's nothing really in there yet because I haven't modeled it. I called it Scooter because that's what I want to model. I downloaded this little image here of a scooter. And so before I model that, I want to sort of analyze what kind of primitives I can use to model this with. As I said, this is a tutorial for the absolute beginner who has never used Maya before and just sort of wants to get started on something. And so as a beginner, you should look at all your models and just extract primitives. So a primitive is a sphere, a cylinder, a box. The primitives essentially in Maya get created here under create polygon primitives. And you can see these sort of sphere, cube, cylinder, torus, plane. They're sort of the most common ones. Cones can sometimes be used, but really 90% of the times it's either a sphere, cube, cylinder. Most of the times it's sphere, cube, cylinder. I often use toruses and pipes. However, if we look at this, if we look at the top one there that we can see, this top thing that we have here, this part, is essentially a cylinder. You know, a cylinder that's lying on its side. You can make the handle from that, and you can make this sort of steering column from a cylinder. These wheels, you could make them from cylinders. Maybe you'd make them out of a torus. A torus is essentially a donut. You could make them out of that, or a cylinder. We'll see what we'll choose. See, here we go. Cylinder will make a wheel as well. That thing down here essentially is a box, just a long, elongated, scaled out box. As is this part. You can make that out of a box, but I'm actually going to create it out of this first box that I will make. So I will sort of extrude it out of this box. And then this part of the torus is probably just this part of the scooter is probably just another either a tube. Maybe we'll make that out of what they call a pipe. They call that. So it's a hollow cylinder. So for now, let's turn that off. We've got essentially 1, 2 cylinders, a box, a pipe. I cannot remember that name. Pipe, cylinders. Let's use a torus for this one just to liven things up a little bit. And here we've got a box. Okay. So what kind of box now? I said it's an elongated one. So let's start maybe with that. If I go into Maya and I have my image, so what I should do is in my scenes folder here, as I said, I want to keep everything that I want to have with that project. I want to keep everything together. So I'm actually going to make a new folder here called reference. And that's where images that I work off go into. So everything that has to do with that scooter goes into that reference folder. So if I go to my downloads folder where I've downloaded that picture, that can go and get copied over across into here, into reference. And then again, if I move computers or put everything onto an external hard drive, everything is together. Cool. So how do I get that scooter into Maya? Normally, I would work with a second monitor, and I'll have it open on the other monitor. But if I want to record it and have it for you to see in here, I'm just going to load it into my viewport as a background image. So for that to work, I will create an image plane, import image. And I don't want to go, so here's my project, here's my source images. I put it into the folder called reference, so which I can't see here because I made it later after I created the project. So I'm just going to go up one level, go into reference, and there's the scooter image, and just open that up. And it now is a background in Maya. Lastly, it's a bit big, so I will just sort of scale that down a little bit. I can change the size here. So instead of 1.4, let's go a bit smaller. Don't know why the left column doesn't work. That's fine. The right column X. The left column is the X, the horizontal size, and the other one is the vertical size. Now, because that's locked, it shouldn't really matter which of those columns you choose. Now here's an offset, so I can move it over to the side and a bit up. So again, left column is X, and the right column is Y. X and Y. X is the horizontal axis, and Y is the up and down axis. So now I've got it nicely placed in the top right corner. I can see it, I can refer to it, and I can now go to my standard polygon primitives and create my scooter. I know I need a box, so I'll start with that. It's a cube. Of course, here I named it wrongly. I called it a box, but yeah, in Maya, this should be called a cube. Let's use the right words. The other thing you want to know in Maya is that traditionally, usually you have the x-axis as the width and the z-axis as the length. So if I want to think about which direction should the length of the scooter be, it should be in the z-axis. It doesn't strictly matter, but if you use the cameras that are in Maya, if I go side, I will see this from the side. If I go orthographic front, I will see it now from the front. So that is important. It's worth sticking to that system. Now, of course, I want a nice flat box. I'll lift it off the ground. And the other thing is I very often at the start want to subdivide. So I want to consider how many subdivisions do I want in this scooter. So if we zoom into this thing, if I extract a box out of here, out of this shape, I know that my box is going to be, there's a bend in the box here. And at the front. So my box needs to be, if I look at the original cube here, if I start with the cube, that's elongated. In order to bend here and there, I will need to have subdivisions, like that. I also want to extrude something out of here. So that means I want another subdivision. So at the very least, I'll need to make a box that has 4 length divisions. And actually, just for good measure, I will put one in the middle. So I'm going to do five length divisions. Now, in this direction, from here to there, this is my the length of the box. So now I want to think, how many of these width divisions do I want? By default, I just have one big segment in width, but because I want to have a from here to there, from that corner to there, then from the far corner to the far end here. That means I need a box that has also got this many width divisions. Do I want any divisions in height? No, I do not. So let's undo that. But I've got 5 in the length, 3 in the width, and 1 in the height. If I made a box like that, I immediately got all the faces that I need to make this shape the way I want it. So let's create that box. In the attribute editor here, when I created my box, oh, this is interesting. I do not have the parameters to create the box because my history was turned off. That history is a principle in Maya that everything you do actually gets remembered by the software. And if you turn that off, you lose all your creation parameters. By default, on your computer, that should be on. So that is this button here. That should be on so that history gets recorded. That way, you will have creation parameters after you've created a cube. You'll see what I mean in a second. I'll have to delete this one and create a new one now. So I go cube, and now I have the creation parameters here. So in the width, I wanted 3, and in the depth, I wanted 5. I can change the width and the depth here as well if I wanted to, but also I could just use the scale tool. And as I said earlier, I'll just move that up. So with all these bits of geometry created and planned for, maybe I'll make it a little bit wider, a little bit thicker, and then I'll start modeling. So right-clicking lets me choose whether I want to work on vertex, edge, or face mode. So these are 3 components. As I said, this is a beginner's tutorial, so I'm going to stick to the basics. Lastly, we have object mode to take us out of component mode. So if I'm in component mode, I can now select vertices and I can move those. And this one goes in the middle, and this one will go at the back. I'll select these vertices back here, take my scale tool and bring it in. Just use R to switch to the scale tool and W to go to your move tool. In fact, I will undo again, and I'm just going to scale these guys. To select something, you just drag around it. If you want to deselect it, you just hold Control as you drag around it, so you can deselect. So you can select the 2 corners here, Control to select, Shift, Control Shift to select and more, Control Shift to select more, and then just Control to deselect. So there we go. I've got this part selected and I can scale those in a little bit. So just done this. And now we go to the front and we'll just sort of bring these vertices back like so. And I think I'll actually take that face and bring it forward and maybe scale that a bit narrower. So that's going to be the bit that comes out diagonally here. Cool. That's a good start. So if I now go to object level, you can see that there's some edges that are sharp, like they're hard edges. This one here, and then that edge here, if I deselect the model, it's not very visible. It's a soft edge. So if I want that, they help models look round. So you have hard and soft edges. I actually want to make this a hard edge, so I'm going to select this one and that one, and then I go to Mesh Display, Harden Edge. Now if I go back to object mode and deselect, I can now see those edges quite clearly. Sweet. Let's go to the back. Let's go to face mode and delete some faces here. Hit delete on the keyboard and they're gone. Now that's the hollow that gets the wheel, and I will append polygon to just quickly create new polygons. Now, I'll show you the append polygon tool in a second. I'm just going to finish this and I'll just then go into more detail click on one edge, click on the opposing edge, hit Y, click one edge, click on the opposing edge, or hit enter. And just want to finish off on soft and hard edges. What we'll see now here is that there's a weird shading happening. Look how dark that gets. Let me just turn off the grid. So as I turn around this, it gets really weirdly shaded. And that is because this is also a soft edge here. Maya is going to try and make that corner here look round. So I need to make those edges hard. I can just select the entire object and go to Mesh Display, Soft and Harden Edges. And what Maya does there, it just goes by angle. And any edge that's sort of 90 degrees will be hardened. In fact, any edge that goes is more than 30 degrees will turn into a hard edge, and every edge that is less than 30 degrees will be a soft edge. Now let me just show you the soft edges. If I create a, let's say, a sphere. Let's look at that sphere here. You don't see the edges on the sphere. If I select some edges, just a selection of edges here, and go Mesh Display Harden Edges, and deselect, you can see those edges have become hard and you can now see them. So it's really just a display on whether those edges are visible or not. But if you have a soft edge like this one here, which is a soft edge, and if I move that away, it's a really acute angle, very sharp edge, but Maya has been told to make it a soft edge. It'll have trouble displaying that nicely round. And that's where this weird shading came from earlier. You can sort of see that it's getting a bit dark here at the moment. So when you have these really strong acute edges, then those are the ones that you should really go and make hard. So like so, and I go hard edges, deselect, and I should probably add, there's one now here that I'm missing diagonally. If I had this weird shape, I would use a cut tool, multi-cut, and I would just hover over a vertex, click, hover over another vertex, click, and then I hit enter. And so this way I can cut more edges. Now instead of hitting enter, I can also hit Y and hit enter. So the difference between enter and Y, let me just finish this, hang on. Select this edge, select all the ones around, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Harden edge, there we go. So this thing does not look weirdly shaded anymore. Maybe I'll make those two soft. Soften edge. So there's a lot of modeling that you can do simply by choosing whether your edges are soft or hard. If I want to fix everything here, I would probably just select the entire sphere and say soft and harden, and it goes through by its 30-degree angle, and it does a pretty nice job. I'm quite except that maybe here at the top it made that soft and I might want that hard. Always have to go back to object mode to deselect the object. A quick way to, once you're in component mode, a quick way to get out of it is hitting F8 until it's green, and then you can select off it. So F8, it takes you back to object mode. Anyway, that's a little talk about softening and hardening edges. I also said I was going to talk about the append polygon tool. So if I delete this face, I can now see into the sphere. And if I wanted to create a new face, I could use this tool here called append to polygon. And it works by clicking on one edge. And once you click on the first edge, it highlights in purple other edges that you can attach to. So if I go to the one on the side here, it now creates a connected polygon between those two. And if I hit enter, I am finished with this tool. If I now want to create another face, I would have to go into that tool again and re-enter the tool, and then I could do another face. Then I could hit enter again. However, this is creating two triangles. I could also create, if I go back into the tool, append to polygon, the top one, and then go straight and select the one below, opposite, and it creates a complete quadrangular face, and I hit enter again. Let's say I wanted to use this tool multiple times. I use it once, turn on my tool, click, click, and now instead of hitting enter, I hit Y, which means Y is just a shortcut for enter plus reactivate the tool you were just using. So I'm still in the tool, so I can now continue clicking. Y, continue clicking, clicking. What did I do there? I didn't click properly on the edge, so let me undo and try that again. Click, click. Yeah, sometimes you're going to be hit Y to re-enter the tool. Just got to make sure that I hit those edges correctly. There we go, Y. And then this one here, hit the edge, hit the opposite one, and hit Y. So now that I'm done with the tool, I can hit Q to get back to select. Q, W, E, R are my Q, W, E, R, the 4 top left buttons in the keyboard. Select, move, rotate, and scale. So hitting Q always takes you out of a tool and goes back into selection mode. Now, back to what I've achieved so far. I've made a hole and I closed the hole. I have not yet extruded the bit, so one of the most useful parts of box modeling is to selecting a face and then extruding out of it. Edit mesh, extrude. And just moving the blue arrow, I can now extrude out of that, and I've got more faces made. So I can now make that diagonal part here simply by taking that extrusion. There's quite a few options here. I can scale in one direction, undo, or in the other direction, or I can scale in all 3 directions by using the middle of the scale tool. I can also move, of course, as you've seen me do. I can also rotate, but in order to rotate, I need to first click this outer circle once. Click it once, and now it turns on my rotate tool. And I can rotate this 90 degrees. I can type it in here into the controls in exactly 90 degrees. And I can move it forward a bit more. Oops, I now want to make sure that I hit the move axis. There we go. Move it forward a bit. And there we go. I've extruded that little part. And now go to edge, maybe move this back a little bit. And maybe move that up a little bit to give it some extra thickness. So that's extruding. And if I now go to object mode and look at that, that doesn't look so bad. One other thing I love doing is beveling my edges. So if I go here to edge and select all these 4 edges here, all 4 of those, go to mesh tools, edit mesh, bevel, and it bevels those. It just gives it a bit of a chamfer essentially. You can play with this fraction slider to find how much you want. And then I go back to object mode and I've got a nice sort of beveled edge here. Because of the history being on, all the steps that I did earlier are still here. From starting from the polycube to making some soft edges to deleting component that was back here when I deleted that part. There is a face that I didn't properly create. So let me just go here and let me just go back to the append to polygon. Click, click. There we go. Don't know what happened there. So you can see there's the history of everything that I did. Delete component, append. There's the first time I appended, then I did some poly edging, that I did this extruding, then I did the beveling here. And so because that history is still there, I still have access to all those actions. So if I go to the extrude phase, I still have access to, for example, how far I extruded that thing and how far I moved it. So I can still go in later and change those. I can even go in there and maybe, you know, where's the divisions here? Add more subdivisions in there. But it screws up a little bit because I have since also made other changes in the model. So I've created new faces back there, and that so there's some things that you can do through history and some things that screw up your model that you can't do anymore. For example, here's that bevel. There was the amount. Essentially, you can change and reposition things, but anything that changes the amount of polygons can screw you up. Where's my fraction here? So I can still make changes to that thickness afterwards. But if I like everything, then it's really worth going through and deleting all this history. You go edit, delete by type history, and if I click that, it now all gets deleted and baked into this model, and that model can no longer, you can no longer access those old tools anymore. If you don't delete history, this list gets very, very long, and then eventually your computer can slow down. The only thing that I'm missing here, this model has some weird air intakes at the front, so I might create those. That would be another extrusion. So face, face, edit mesh, extrude. This time on the extrude, I will want to scale them in first. So I click one of the scale boxes, but I just click it, I don't move on it. I click it once because that activates the middle one, and now I can click on the middle one and scale everything a little bit smaller. And then maybe scale that out a bit on the one axis like so, and that's done. Now I go edit mesh extrude again to do a new extrude, and now this time I'm extruding inwards. Now if you look at the angle at which I'm extruding inwards, if I go into wireframe, I don't want them to go in this direction because they always go in the direction of the face that the face is pointing, which is called the normal direction. So it goes in the direction of the face normal. However, the extrude tool, in addition to all these rotation and scaling and moving gizmos here, it's also got this little switch here at the top right corner. And that is to switch the coordinate axis between a local space and a world space. So normally I would extrude in local space into the face direction, but I can click that, and now the axis is like the world axis that you can see down here. So now I'm extruding in world space. So I'm extruding really nicely backwards. I'll scale that, scale that, scale that another time, and I'm done. Go back to object mode and just hit 5 to go back into shaded. And now I'm happy. Now I'm finished with that model. Detailed little model. The next step would be maybe to create a wheel, or maybe the steering column. Let's do a wheel. I said I was going to use a torus for that, so let's create torus. There we go. Create it, rotate it on its side, exactly 90 degrees. And then I'm going to turn on that ground plane again so I can sort of see what height I should have. If that grid is too small for me, I can go to the grid display here, options, and just make it a little bit wider. So instead of 12 units, let's go 22. That's still not enough. Display, grid, let's go 40. There we go. So if I go in side view also, I don't really need to see the grid in the perspective view. I can see it here. How big should that wheel be? Well, let's just increase the radius to that. Let's look in our reference. That's what that's why we have that reference here. So we can sort of see if we like the size. What I was doing here was switching viewports, front, side, and so on. This is just hitting the spacebar. So wherever the mouse is going, if I hover my mouse over the side viewport and hit spacebar, it becomes large. If I hit spacebar again, it goes to my 4 viewports. The other thing I like to do a lot is hold down spacebar, and then I get lots of menus to choose from here. I just right click on the one in the middle, and then I can go to perspective, right, top view, front view. So you'll see me do this a lot as well. Anyway, that wheel needs to be a little bit thicker, so I'm just going to create that. I do want to have a fewer around this axis, and certainly fewer around that axis. Maybe let's go. Let's maybe go 9. Yeah, that looks nice. I do want to be low poly. You can always later on smooth it. Hit 3 on the keyboard to see what it looks like when it's smooth, and then hit 1 again to see what it looks like as it's faceted and low poly. The hitting 3 is really just a preview. That's not what it renders like, but or depending on what render engine you use, sometimes it does look like what it's rendering like, but really you want to just preview that, place it nicely on the ground here. This is the ground line. Then I want to go back, hitting 1 to go back to faceted. So this wheel looks like it's in the right place and sort of the right size as well. But this wheel is hollow and that wheel is solid, so I will use some more extruding. I'll show you that you can how you can select all these faces on the inside very quickly. Double click on the edge, because if you double click on it, it selects the entire loop. And then I'll just use Control F11 That's what I would use to convert these edges into polygon selection. So select, convert selection to faces is Control F11. You can see that here. So if I click that, you will see that from my edges, instead of having edges selected, click, I now have all the faces selected that were touching that edge. So it's a very quick way to select those faces. Really, you're in edge mode, you just double click, Control F11, bam, you got the whole ring selected. And from this, I can grow my selection, which is the triangular bracket crease. So I'm actually gonna grow it a little bit longer. Shrink it like this, grow it like that. I can grow it more and more, and I can shrink it more and more. So my select grow is this sort of triangular bracket, and shrink is that triangular bracket. And now that I've done that, edit mesh, extrude is Control E, so you can over time learn the shortcuts as well, or just use the menu buttons. So what do I want to do here? I want to extrude that, but I want to extrude in world space. I'll extrude it outward a bit, like that. Then I'll create a new extrude, mesh, extrude again in world space, and this time I'm going to scale it in, like so. Let's see my reference. Yep, that's sort of giving me that disk. When I scale it in, what I'm doing here, I can scale it on the x-axis, which is in-out, right? But I can also scale it on the other two, the green and blue axis, and not the red one, if I invert it. So it's clicking on the red axis scales only on the red axis. Control clicking, holding down control and then clicking on the red axis, scales everything except the red axis. So I'm now scaling the blue and the green axis, the Z and the Y, and I'm not scaling on the x-axis, which is good. It's a good way to sort of bring this in a little bit, make it a bit smaller, maybe not quite so small, maybe like that. And I didn't actually want to scale in like that, so maybe like this. And then lastly, I'll hit delete to get rid of all those interior faces. Now let's close that hole again, double click on the edge to select everything, and then click fill hole. Do it on the other side as well, double click, hit G, Golf, G on the keyboard to just repeat. G repeats the last action that you did. I'm now selecting these two things and I'm going back to extrude, Control E. And this time I will extrude outwards. So I just have both sides selected, so I can do it on both sides simultaneously. Select that outwards, do it again, hit G to invoke another repeat of the action. And now I'm gonna scale that down. And maybe that's it for now. Leave it. Hit F8 to go back to object mode. And there is a wheel that I have modeled. And if you look at what I did, it was really extruding, another extruding, oops, extruding, I deleted bits. I closed border, that was when I hit edit mesh, when I hit mesh fill hole, that closed the hole. And then two more extrusions. So really, mainly created this just by extruding bits and pieces. Let's make the steering column. That's a cylinder. So create cylinder, move it into position, scale it up, or I can also go into here and just play with the height until I get the height that I want. Maybe set the scale back to 1 and then just exclusively do it by height. How many segments around do I want to have? Not so many, so I'm going to reduce that. I really like working with numbers that are dividable by 4, because then you can work on quadrants. You can delete bits, just work on a quarter and then duplicate it again to get if you're doing something really complex like a thread of a tire or something, you can subdivide your models. If it's divisible by 4, you can delete half the model or in the width, or you can delete half the model in front back. So in width or in length, you can delete half of it and model on only half a model, and then duplicate the other half, which in this case I won't do because it's just a cylinder. But if you make a human character, you want to model just one arm, and then later on you want to flip the arm over to the other side. So you always try to make geometry that has a straight line down its length, so you can divide it in the middle, and also one down the width. The width and the length should have lines that you can cut the model in half with, which is why I start with primitives that have sort of 16 sides or 12 sides or 20 sides, because those are the numbers that will give me those, this essentially the cross in a perfect Z and perfect X line. So 16 looks good, that's fine. Now how many height do I need? Well, let's go back into Photoshop here and let's think about what this thing needs to do. So we have height segments. There is the way this thing works, it's sort of down here is a section that is thick. Then it gets a bit thinner for a little while. Then we have another section here that is thick. And then we're getting thinner again. Then we have the long section to the top, and then we stop. So that's our cylinder. So we have one segment. That's one. This is 1, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we want a cylinder that has 7 height. So let's go across here and give it those 7 height segments. Bam. So that's what really speeds up your modeling. If you really plan ahead and how you want to model these things. From now on, it's really just scaling. So what I'm scaling and moving. So I'm going to move vertices. This is going to be the thing down here. It's going to end up there. Let's go maybe into side view. No, I don't want to go into side view because then I cannot see the background image. So I'll stay in perspective view. So I'm just going to move like this. And this is going to be the part that is thin. So let's think about this. We'll take these faces here. We'll scale them in and move them down like so. Scale that whole thing in a little bit more, move it down a bit more. Then we'll take this next section, vertices, move them down. Because I scaled these bits in, this is now a thinner part. And all this goes down as well. This goes down to here. And then all these faces here, they get scaled. Use a scale tool, and this time I don't want to scale the height, so I hold down Control on the height, so I'm only scaling the width, not the height. Cool. So there's that shape. I can then go into edges and just clean that up. Just double click on the edge, go to my move tool, and maybe bring that down a little bit more. Bring that up a bit more. And maybe that's sort of the shape that I like. That'll do. Now we have the problem with soft and hard edges again. Because this was cylinder, the sides are all soft, so I'm just going to select that object, mesh display soft and harden edges to fix that, and all the really acute ones, the really strong edges have now become hard. Sweet. There's that bit. Maybe go vertex and make that a little bit taller. What I should have is a perfect side-on view. So when you do car models or airplanes or anything really more complex than a scooter, you should have orthographic side and top views and front views so you can really get the right height and the right width of everything. Here I'm just eyeballing it. The scooter has a weird sort of this part here where there's some screws going through. So that's over at the end of this. So I might extrude that. Go some faces here. Select those two guys. Hit Control E for extrude, and because I don't want to go into my local coordinate space because the cylinder is bent, so those two faces go in different directions, and therefore everything gets wider. Let me undo that. Let me click on here to go in world space coordinate system, so I go straight back. That way it does not get wider. And now if I extruded it, I can scale that to make that last bit nice and flat. Scale about 3 times. Don't scale. Don't do this. Don't scale once, because if you scale too far, it mirrors. So you just want to scale into the middle a little bit, and then a second time, and then a third time, and then you can be pretty sure that you've got it nicely flat. And maybe I'll just move that in a little bit. We don't need it quite so far away. That'll do. Object mode. Cool. So now we've got this thing modeled. Let's think about that guy down here, which we hadn't actually considered. That part that holds the fork, essentially, that holds the the wheel, I'm going to make that out of another box. So let's go in here, create a cube, bring that forward, and because I want to have two side bits coming down and a middle bit, so essentially this thing looks from the front, it looks like this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's draw a box here. This is my normal box. I'm going to start out with a box that has 3 width segments, so that I can select this face and that face, and then I can extrude them outwards to make those 2 prongs. So I'll show you that. So essentially what I need is I need a box which has 1, 2, 3 width segments. So I'm going to go to my polycube width 3, width subdivisions 3. The width should also be increased. Yep, that's true. I should also increase the depth and maybe decrease the height. Maybe like that. Bring it up there. Maybe bring it up a little bit higher. Like so. That's cool. And before I extrude, I'm just going to go to edges, select these 2 edges, and scale them out. In fact, I don't think that I think the entire box needs to be scaled out a bit wider, like that. And then I'm going to select this face, shift select that one, extrude, in world space, why not? Down. Once I'm down here, let me just go to wireframe, it's easier to see. Once I'm down there, like that, I might just move that forward, and also I'll go to scale and just scale that down a little bit. Move and scale. Let's look at that. Maybe move it up a bit more. Now it's probably not wide enough. Maybe I'm going to take the entire object and just scale that all a little bit wider, and maybe make that inner opening a little bit thicker by selecting the inside faces and just scaling that out. And that'll do for now. Cool. Let's go back to object mode. For a quick model, I'm happy with that. Now, we want to also move things. We have a lot of things here in the outline, lots of different objects. We've got a p-cube, which I'm just going to call platform. And then we have, this is sphere 1. This is from a sphere that I made earlier when I showed you something. This is a bit of a leftover piece from the sphere, so I'm just going to delete that. Torus 1 here is our front wheel. P-cylinder 1, that's our steering column. Let's call it steering. P-cube 2 is the fork thing. And the last thing, well, we need a few more things. We need a rear wheel, we need the mudguard, and we need the handles. So let's do the handles. Create a cylinder, bring it up, bring it forward. There is a tool, which is the align tool, which you can use. I can take 2 objects and modify align tool, and then I can move them like so that their left sides line up, or I can move it like so that their right sides line up, or I can go in the middle here so that their middles line up. In this case, this align tool doesn't work so well anymore because this object is asymmetrical. So maybe this gets me closest, but it's probably still not perfectly in the center. Doesn't matter so much. We'll just continue from here on. I want to go sideways, so I go minus 90 degrees, and I'll definitely have more height. I'll go with 16 subdivisions in the axis, and how many in the height? Well, let's go back here, plan that through. I have 1 subdivision here, I'll have a kink there, I'll have, I need to go wide, so that's 2 there, and then from here I'll finish that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 on the other side makes 8, and this one in the middle makes a total of 9. So we'll go with 9 height. There we go. And then we can maybe get the right radius, just getting it a little bit thinner. Placing it down there. Actually, I'll place it up there and then I'll start modeling the shape. So go face, select all the ones in the middle, move them down. I cannot really see my handle here in my background image, so I'm going to go to View, Image Plane Attributes, where I can just move that down a little bit, like so. I should be able to, I can see that better. So really, this is the handle. Now, in order to work on both sides simultaneously, I can select this side and then that side and then do some scaling. So that's one way of working with symmetry. Or you can do it just by selecting one side only, and here up there in symmetry, just go to World X and we'll be working symmetrical. So now I'm moving them and everything that I do on one side of the model also happens on the other side. So I'll select these faces, these vertices, move them out. I'll select these faces here and scale them up. Make them a bit wider. Also maybe a bit wider in this direction. Maybe these vertices here should be rotated. You can see how nicely that works with the rotation when you're working in mirroring in symmetry mode. So let's just do that. Maybe not rotate them so much after all. So what do I think? That, make that a little bit wider. And go to, yep. Maybe everything here is just a little bit too thick, so I'm just going to scale everything down a little and then maybe scale it out. Makes that handlebar a little bit thinner. Cool. What's happening here? There is something that I missed. That little vertex there needs to come out. And in fact, that handle has a bit of a roundness, so maybe I'll actually stick it out a little bit more. If you go View, Look at Selection, you will start rotating around the selected, so that makes it easier to look at things. I might bevel that edge. So go to Edge, double click on it, Mesh, Bevel, Edit Mesh, Bevel, and then play with my fraction to sort of get that happening here. So I'm happy with that, and then I'll do the good old soften harden. Oh, sorry, soften harden. The edges are too acute to harden, so I'm actually going to go to soften harden and increase my angle a little bit. Maybe go 60 degrees. So now that softens that. But it's also softened these guys here because they were also 60 degrees. So better maybe to do it manually. Double click, and then just go harden those. Cool. So let's take this object, double click in here and call it handle. I've already got a wheel, so I don't have to make a new wheel. I just go edit duplicate. And I've got a second wheel. Move it back there. Maybe rename after duplicating front wheel, I now have a new one called front wheel 1. I'm just going to call it rear wheel instead. Let's put that over here. What I just did there to quickly zoom in is hit F to quickly zoom in onto the selected object. Put that sort of in here, and I think I might have to go into wireframe and just bring out the edges a bit. I'm going to do that grow trick, like grow these this selection here, and then I'll just move it out until we're getting through there. That's cool. And then maybe I'll grow it again, and this time I'm using my scale, but scaling only in the blue and the red one to make this thing a little thinner. Maybe I should make my entire platform here a little bit thicker. I do want that wheel to stick through the axle, just stick through it. Alrighty, now comes the last part where we sort of assemble this thing. The models are all finished. Nope, we don't have the mudguard. Ha, the mudguard isn't there yet. So for that, I think I might use another torus. I had thought about using a pipe, but I'll use the torus instead. No, I'll use a pipe. I'll use a pipe. Create, just because you've already seen me use a torus. So let's use pipe. Pipe is this. It's like a hollow cylinder. So I'm going to bring that here. I'm going to rotate that on its side exactly 90 degrees. So I'm going to go in here and change my minus 90.887 to exactly 90. And now I can play with its radius. We have an outer radius and we have a thickness here with this pipe. So we can get the thickness that we want, and we can get a radius. Let's make that a bit smaller. In fact, let's bring that down here. The way that the mudguard works, the pivot point of that should be pretty much in the center of where the wheel is. So if I look at where the wheel is, bring the pivot point here, sort of to the center, and then the correct radius. Increase the radius, and then the thickness as well, maybe like that. So let's look at this. Oh, by the way, how I'm doing this here, I just when I'm clicking in here, changing the thickness like this, it's just highlight the word thickness and then middle mouse drag in the viewport to change those values. If I go radius, I go middle mouse drag here to hit the radius, and now I might do the same thing with the height of that object. So polypipe, height, and then middle mouse drag in here until I get that where I want it to be. So that's sort of there. This platform, I'm going to select that one face, just move that in there like so. So we don't have that gap. And finally, I'm just going to delete the faces of that pipe that I don't want. Actually, there looks like there is a bit of a roundness to it. So to get that roundness, I'm actually, before I delete the faces, remember that once I change the number of faces by editing them, history prevents me from doing good work with my with the older creation parameters. So that's why I always want to get the number of segments correct before I do anything else. So I'm going to give those 2 segments here, because that means I can actually change the roundness of it later. In fact, I can select it right now. Select all these faces here down the middle, like so. Should have selected them all. Yep. And now if I should turn off the symmetry now, don't need symmetry anymore. But if I scale all this up, just a little bit, you can see how I get that roundness. Just scaling them up like that. Maybe scaling them wider like that a little bit as well. And now I can delete all the faces that I don't want. So I'm just going to select these guys here and then use my triangular brackets to grow that selection. Grow, grow, grow. Grow one more. Delete. And then these guys as well. Hit delete. So all I've got there is a stupid opening at the back, which I can use the good old append to polygon to close that. Click, click, Y. Click, click, Y. Click, click, Y. And that's closed. Because of I have weird shading here from the smoothness, I'm going to quickly run the soft and harden edge again. Go to object mode. There we go. Just out of neatness, I might take that last face here and move it back a little bit. I think that looks nicer. Now there are some deformations that we can use, which are nice to know about, which is deforming an object. And that is because this object actually seems to get thinner towards the rear here. I'm going to use, under the deform menu, something called a lattice. If I just click on lattice, you're getting, let me just click on, I don't think these are the default settings for the lattice. Deform lattice, let's just go to the options, edit, reset, to make sure that we have the default settings. So deform lattice. By default, it sort of gets created with a certain amount of width, height, and depth settings. So there you go, divisions that this lattice has. And a lattice is essentially a deformer. If I go to lattice points here, I can move those lattice points and it deforms the geometry underneath. So you can use it as a sculpting tool. Now with this particular one, I really just want the lowest number of divisions, 2, 2, and 2. And then I'll just go grab back here, lattice points, grab those two, and maybe the ones down there, like so. And use my scale tool to just scale that in. The reason I'm using that lattice is because it scales the entire model now. I can go back here to select all those guys and scale them out if I wanted that a bit wider. Hit F8. Now an interesting thing about these deformers is that they are separate objects. So we can have this object here, which we're going to call mudguard. Then we have these other two objects, lattice and lattice base. So please be aware that these are separate objects. If I select the mudguard and I move it, because I'm not moving the lattice effect gets undone. You can see that here. It really only works if it's inside the model. I can take all three objects and move them around. That's going to be fine. But really the lattice in this case is just meant for modeling. If I'm happy with it, I can delete my history, and that's going to get rid of it. It's going to collapse all this. See, there's my FFD, freeform deformer. There's that lattice at the top there. It's the last thing that I added. So if I go to Edit, Delete by Type History, it collapses everything. The lattice disappears out of the outliner, and this is all nice and clean. The last thing you want to do is attach everything so we can actually use it as a scooter. At the moment, if I select the steering column, I move it by itself. It moves by itself, so that's no good. So we need to think about hierarchy. I want to grab the thing here and just move everything. But I also want to grab the steering column, and when I rotate it, I want the wheel and the handlebars and everything to rotate with it. So that means this little fork down here gets parented to the steering. So this is middle mouse dragging. Handle, middle mouse click, and then drag onto the steering column and then let go. So fork and handle are now part of the steering column. So if I select the steering column, I don't select all of these things, but they're not, see, the fork and the handle are not selected. It's just the steering column that is selected. But because the others are children of the steering column, they move along with it. So if I now move the steering column, they all move together. This is a parenting hierarchy. Lastly, we want to get the wheel, and we want to parent the wheel to the fork. So front wheel, middle mouse drag onto the fork. So click, there it goes. So you can see how we have this indentation here. The platform, the steering wheel then goes to the platform. Now, here's something interesting to learn. Very, very important part. Oh, actually, there's a big gap here. So let me just move everything back so we're touching that. And I think maybe I'll want to model these faces here just a little bit wider. Like so. Yeah. Okay. Now I can delete all history everywhere on all objects. I want to do that. So I go Edit. Instead of delete by type, I'm going to delete all by type history. And on every object anywhere in the scene, history has now been deleted, which makes my scene a little bit nicer. The other thing I should consider is that I have never saved this file. Last time I saved it was when it was empty, so I should go File, Save Scene. It's already called Scooter, so I just have to overwrite the existing one. Also, this whole thing seems to be just a little bit too long, or the handle is too short. Either or. Something's not right in the proportions. This sucker here seems to be a little bit too thick. So I'm just going to select all those faces and just scale them in a little bit in width. I can't really scale them in height because if I do that, I do damage. But what I can do is there's not much I can do at this stage in that thickness, not without a lot of work. Oh, maybe. Let's just show you what you do. Troubleshooting is part of the fun. So I'm going to select, the way I would fix this, and the way I would make that thinner is I would select all that, move it, take these guys with me as well. Move that forward to make it a little bit thinner. What that has done is done this stupid skewing here at the front, but I can undo that again if I select the vertices there. Now here's a neat little trick. If you want to get them exactly to the same height as those vertices, I can move them here on the x-axis and I can eyeball it, or I can use vertex snapping. This button there turns on vertex snapping. And so now as I move them, they snap to different, you can see how they don't move smoothly anymore, they snap to different vertices. So I can just hover my mouse over the, I'm dragging, and as I hover over these vertices, they snap to those vertices. Goes in all directions. So if I click on the green axis and I now do it, they snap vertically to those vertices, which I don't want to do. But I could get them to the ground level by just now middle mouse clicking on those vertices here, which I don't want to do. But it's this vertex snapping. I usually don't click that button. I just hold V on the keyboard. Does the same thing. And now I can just drag, like this is left mouse dragging here. Left mouse dragging over a vertex. If I'm over these vertices, it's all nicely snapped. And then I'll just move that down a little bit, and I think I've made the whole column a bit thinner. Coolio. Now where was I? I was thinking that this whole object is still a little bit too long, so I'm going to just bring that in and then bring those two objects back as well. And maybe that steering column is a little bit too short. So what's happening here? What's happening here is that I've got two objects selected, and they have different coordinate systems. So when I move it on the x-axis, which is this green is y, blue is z, and red is x. So moving it up and down on the x-axis. But this object here, x-axis, for this object, x-axis is up and down. For this object, x-axis is left-right. So the two objects have different x-axes. So it's probably better to do it one object at a time. You can fix all this stuff, but you can also just, in this case, we'll just move them like so. Yeah, that looks good. That's good enough. So that has become a little bit longer. And I can now select the steering column and just rotate the entire front wheel. But if I select the stuff, nothing else goes with it, so I still have to do some parenting. So I'm going to take that wheel, rear wheel, and I middle mouse drag it onto platform. So now the wheel moves with the platform. I'm going to go to the mudguard, middle mouse drag it onto the platform, and so the mudguard also now moves with the platform. That's great. Now check this out. I'm going to take the steering and move it onto the platform. That's cool. That all now moves with the platform. However, when I now want to rotate the steering, check out what happens. Can you see? I'm not sure how clearly visible that is. Let's go into top viewport. It's not so bad. Let me demonstrate. This is actually not such a bad problem, so I cannot really show you what the problem is. Let me show you on a different model. A new scene. Create a cube, and let me just scale that cube twice. So exactly twice in the z-axis. So there's now a scaled cube, and the cube rotates. If I create another cube, I will not scale this cube, so the scale is 1, 1, 1, and this cube nicely rotates as well. However, when I parent cube 2 to the first one, so now the second one, the small cube, is a child of the first cube. If I now rotate that, you can see how it skews. It doesn't stay a cube anymore. You can also see that if I unparent it again, you can see that its scale is 1, 1, 1, but the moment I parent it, its scale becomes 1, 1 and half. So the z is half. The reason the z is half is because the parent cube has a z of 2. So in order for this child cube to stay as its shape, so the scales get passed down the hierarchy from parent to child. So what happens is, because this cube is a scale of 2, that guy, when it rotates, the rotation gets calculated first and then the scale happens later on. So it gets this scale applied after the rotation has happened. So this is the way the computer processes those transforms. So whenever you parent something, you get these skewing rotations. They are because the parent up here has a non-uniform scale. You fix this by going to that parent, right-clicking, freeze scale. It's not changed the model, but it has reset all those scales back to 1, 1, 1, and now the child does not distort and it rotates properly. So this freezing of the scale is essential. It's really an important part that you have to do whenever you start parenting objects together. So if I go back to my recent file, to the scooter here, because that parent has a scale, but the scale is tiny, 0.99, it's almost 1. So that's why you didn't actually notice the distortions here so much. But they are there. So really what we need to do is go to that scale and freeze it. In fact, we should make sure that we do that on all objects. So we should check that all objects have their scale frozen. So 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, this one is 1, 1, 1. They're all good. Most objects I didn't really change the scale much. Okay, cool. There is a scooter model. Maybe the wheels don't look so nice yet. They probably should be a little, have a little bit more detail. What I'm going to do is go mesh, smooth, give them one iteration of smoothness. But then I have to, after doing that, I have to go to my edges and harden them again. So I will go turn the symmetry on. Yeah, you know what? I could do that here, mesh display, harden edge, go here, double click, harden, and maybe here on the outside. But actually, I'm not sure that I needed that smooth. But it's probably worth showing you that you can smooth objects. It increases the polygon count somewhat awful. Show isolate, view selected. This hides everything except for the one that I'm working on. And I might want to go just double click here and harden that. Yeah, I'm not sure that I like that. Let me just get this edge here and scale that in. And because I'm in symmetry mode, it happens on the other side as well. That's better. I double click that and bring that forward a bit. And go to this one and scale it up a bit. Okay, cool. That's a nice wheel. And then I will show isolate and turn off my isolation mode so I can see everything else. And on the rear wheel, I might do something similar. Let me just go into isolation mode. But I might this time only smooth the wheel. So I'm going to go double click these two edges. I should turn off symmetry right now. Do my Control F11 trick to select more. Do the grow trick to select even more. And now I've got those parts selected. What happens if I now mesh smooth only them? And I sort of don't get so many polygons here in the middle. It still does the smoothing, but I can sort of probably fix that with a quick soften harden edge. So this tutorial was much more involved than I had imagined, but it gives you a bit of an idea of how we could model these things, starting really with basic primitives like boxes, cylinders, and so on, how you think about how many width and height segments these objects should have in order to make modeling easy. And then it was mainly scaling, moving vertices, and extrusions that I did here. And the next tutorial that I'll do probably will involve how to texture that sucker. for now this will do. Save the file and have a break.